My name is Elva Trask. I am 68 years old, and I keep a bakery on the bridge corner in the town of Coldwater, down in the crook of the Sable River. It isn't much to look at, my shop. A squat brick building with a bowed front window, a plank counter worn pale as bone, a brick oven in the back big enough to crawl into that my father laid course by course with his own 2 hands. And out front, under that window, a wide stone sill worn into a shallow dish by 50 years of hot loaves set out to cool. And every night of my life that I have been able to stand at that oven, the very last thing I do before I bank the fire and climb the stairs is set 2 warm loaves out on that sill, in the dark, on the far side from the street lamp where the light does not reach, and I do not look to see who takes them. And I have never once counted what is left in the morning. Those 2 loaves in the dark are the beginning and the middle and the end of everything I mean to tell you tonight. So pull your chair up close to the stove, because nothing else will make a lick of sense until you understand why an old woman bakes 2 extra loaves every night of her life and gives them away to a street she cannot see. I was a girl of 9 the winter I learned what a loaf of bread is worth. And I do not mean the 2 cents my father charged for one. That was the winter he came down off the eave with a snapped roof pole and his right leg crushed under it, and for 11 weeks he could not stand at the oven that fed the 5 of us. And my mother, God love her and forgive her, was the proudest woman ever born in that valley, and she would sooner have laid down in the snow than knock on a neighbor's door with her hand out. So we went hungry in a town full of bread, the way proud families always have, which is to say alone. I had a little brother then. His name was Ansel, and he was 4, and he had a laugh like water going over stones, and I want you to hold on to him, because he is the reason for all of it. Now the old widow who kept this very shop before me, a big raw-boned woman named Sill, had a custom half the town thought foolish. Every night she set her day's unsold loaves out on this sill in the dark and pulled her curtain and never looked to see whose hand came for them, and told anybody who asked the bread was only cooling. But it was set where a proud family could send a child down the alley in the black of night and take a loaf and never be seen, and never have to say the word please, because my mother could take from a dark windowsill what she could not take from a lit doorway. I was the one they sent, down the frozen alley at midnight to lift 2 warm loaves off this stone and run home with them under my arms like stolen gold. It kept us, and kept my father till his leg knit. But it did not keep Ansel. My brother had gone too thin too early that hungry autumn, and a cough got down in his chest in February, and there was no strength left in him to fight it, and he died 3 weeks before the thaw, 4 years old, in a town full of bread, for the want of anybody ever knowing we were hungry. And I have thought every night since that if the taking had only been quieter and sooner, my brother would have grown up to be an old man. So when Sill was failing, I bought this shop off her with money saved a dime at a time, and she took my 2 hands in her big cracked ones and made me promise one thing, which was the sill. "Keep it," she said. "Set it where the street lamp don't reach. And never look, and never count, and never let a soul in this town be made to ask." I have kept that promise 50 years, and I tell you all this so plain because there came a winter when the mill died, and the whole town went hungry the way my family once did, and an old baker found out what 50 years of bread in the dark is really worth, and who had been keeping the account. But the biggest things nearly always start with somebody being cruel on a cold afternoon in front of a crowd that laughs. So I have to tell you about a man. His name is Harlan Vance, and though he has since earned a little fairness, 3 winters ago he was nothing but a hard, cold, prospering man who had decided other people's hunger was a moral failing he was too clever to catch. Vance owned the mercantile and the grain elevator down by the spur line, and for 2 years he had wanted my corner. Not the whole shop. He wanted the lot, the good corner where the bridge road meets the river road and every wagon in the valley has to slow and turn, because he meant to tear my father's brick down and put up a grain block with his name over the door. Twice he offered to buy me out. $400 the last time, and twice I told him no, because my father laid that oven brick by brick and Sine fed a hungry child off that sill. And there is no figure a man can write on a bank draft that buys a woman off the 2 square rods her whole life is standing on. Vance took my no the way that kind of man takes no from a woman, smiling with only the bottom half of his face. One of these hard years is going to close you, Elva, he said, folding his offer back into his coat. Sentiment don't rise like bread. That autumn had been a hard one all over. Banks failing back east and families put out on the roads with everything they owned rocking in a wagon, and Coldwater, which had forgotten it was ever hungry, took to calling those families road trash. One raw November afternoon I was across the street loading flour when a road family drove their broke-down wagon up to the mercantile, and the man climbed down, hat in his hands, and asked would Vance stand them a sack of meal against honest work. And Vance came out onto his step in his good gray coat, in front of 8 loafing men, looked that family over like a lame horse, and said loud so the whole street would take the lesson, "We do not feed beggars in this town, for it only teaches them the way back. If a man cannot fill his own children's bellies, he can drive on and be hungry where it is somebody else's conscience." And the men on the step laughed. Not all of them. But enough. And then Vance's eye fell on me across the street, and he raised his voice and put it on me. "And you can quit setting your charity on that windowsill, Elva Trask," he called, "for all you do is bait the town with soft bread and draw every stray in the territory to my corner." And I stood there in the cold with a flour sack in my arms and the whole street looking, and I did not say one single word. I have been ashamed of that silence every day since, and I have come to believe everything the winter sent afterward was the good Lord and the hard road together, handing one cowardly old woman the chance to answer proper. That same family Vance ran off came up my alley at dusk, because a hungry family run out of one door does not come boldly through the next. I was banking my oven when I heard them, the dry squall of an ungreased axle and the blow of 2 worn-out horses, and under it, thin and worn to nothing, the coughing of a small child, the kind that has gone on so long it forgets there was ever another way to breathe. I went out the side door with my lamp turned low, and there they were, a high-patched wagon, 1 wheel wound round with wire, a man and a woman on the seat, and behind them the shapes of children and an old woman, and everything they owned under a wet tarp. The man did not get down. It was the woman who spoke, and her voice had the careful level evenness of somebody carrying a brimful bucket she has made up her mind not to spill. "Ma'am," she said, "we don't mean to trouble you. We were told there might be a sill on the bridge corner where a body could take a loaf without begging for it, and we'd not have come for ourselves, but we have a little one that has not eaten today, and I have run clean out of pride to stand on." And I looked up at them, and I will tell you exactly what went through me, because it is the hinge of the whole thing. It was not pity. Pity is a coin you toss down to somebody you have already set below you. What went through me was a frozen alley 50 years gone, and a girl running with 2 loaves under her arms, and a 4-year-old boy who did not see the thaw, and I heard my own voice come out steadier than I felt. "There is a sill," I said, "but not for you. You have a sick child and 2 dead-beat horses, and the dark coming on cold, and you are not taking a loaf off my stone and driving on. Turn your team up the alley. There's a shed for the horses and a table with room at it, and you'll sleep under my roof tonight. I'll hear no argument in this weather." The woman looked down at me a long moment, and the man turned his face to her, and something passed between them without a word, the way it does between married people who have been poor together a long time. Then she said, "Lo, we can't pay you, ma'am." "I know it," I said. "I didn't ask you." Their name was Selkirk, road people of an old and honorable trade, for they were millwrights. 4 generations of them who built and mended the mill wheels and grinding gear up and down these valleys, and had run clean out of mills to mend in a year when every failing town let its wheel go dark to save the wage. The man was Cass Selkirk, near 40, quiet, broad through the back, with the biggest and most careful hands I ever saw on a living man, and he did not spend 3 words where a nod would carry the freight. His wife was Rhoda, the one who had spoken, worn thin the way the ear had worn a great many good women, with a level face and a way of looking at a thing dead on without flinching. There was a boy near grown named Will, all wrists and knuckles, who had the horses unhitched before anybody asked, a solemn round-faced girl of 10 named Prue, who took charge of a bundle of quilts like it was the church silver, the old grandmother that the road called Gran Ivy, straight as a rake handle under a black shawl, with 2 eyes like chips of blue river ice that priced my whole soul in one look and did not seem too disappointed in the figure, and the little one who had been coughing, a girl of about 3 named Bet, hot and heavy against her mother's chest. I got that family into my kitchen and into the good light, and the rest of the ledger read itself off to me the way it does to anybody who has known a hungry house of her own. Their meal sack, when Rhoda set it on my table, was folded flat and empty. That baby was fevered. Those horses were finished. And under their tarp, oiled and wrapped and cared for like scripture, were the great wrenches and shaping chisels of a family that built in oak and iron and had run flat out of anything left to build. So I stoked the oven till the bricks sang, fried side meat, and opened my last jars of pole beans and set the milk to warming, and fed feverfew and honey down that hot little girl a spoon at a time, and then I stood and watched a hungry family eat, which is a thing that takes an old woman's insides and sets them all in a new place. They ate quiet and steady, not grabbing. Rhoda fed the baby broth off a spoon before she took a bite herself, and Big Cass would not sit, but ate standing by the door, and went out after to see the strange horses bedded, for a man of his raising does not rest first. Over supper Rhoda gave me their names one at a time, and I gave them mine, and that was the whole of what I asked. I did not ask where they were bound, nor what put them on the road in November with a wired wheel and a sick baby, for a family at your table is not a prisoner giving testimony. But Rhoda told me some of it anyway. Her voice kept flat on purpose. They had come to the mercantile to trade honest work for meal, and the man on the step had called them beggars in front of the town. "I don't tell you for pity, ma'am," she said, looking at me square. "I tell you so you know what manner of folk you have taken under your roof, in case you'd rather think again before morning." "I've thought on it," I said. "Eat your beans," and from the corner by the stove old Gran Ivy let out one dry cackle and said, "She'll do, Rhoda. Sill keepers is a breed apart." And the kitchen eased and the baby slept. When the children were fed to the eyebrows, I took Rhoda up the back stair and opened the door on my spare room, which had been my own children's room a long time ago, before the fever years took them too. 2 good beds and a quilt on each I had pieced through 50 winters. "Your family sleeps warm here," I said. "Tonight and every night you're held over. And there's a bolt on the inside if it sits easier." Rhoda read that room slow and whole, and put her flat hand on the door frame the way you lay it on a headstone. And all she said was thank you. But there was a whole winter of held-back weariness let go in the way she said it. Now here comes the part I have told at more firesides than I can count, and I ask you to hear it plain. Before she turned in, Rhoda came back down to where I was covering the risen dough, squared herself up, and said, "Mrs. Trask, I'll say one thing before I sleep, so it's said and heard, and you can never claim you weren't told. Amongst road people, amongst them that build and grind and mend their way across this country, bread set out in the dark is a debt. Not the kind you write in a ledger, the kind kept in the marrow. You set warm bread on a stone in the dark for 50 years and asked nobody their name nor a penny, and then took a family the whole town called beggars and fed them off your own plate and asked them nothing, and that is written now. Written where no bad year can burn it and no proud man can buy it, and it draws its interest quiet, and one day it comes due, and it is paid, every loaf of it. You don't understand what I'm telling you yet. That's all right. Some winter you will." And I told her a loaf of bread was not a debt. It was just neighborliness, and cost me nothing I'd miss. And Rhoda shook her head once, slow, the way you shake it at a child who is harmlessly wrong, and said, "It isn't neighborliness and it isn't nothing. It's bread kept for people you'll never meet, on nights you'll never know about, for 50 years, set where they need never thank you. The road knows exactly what that is, even when the one setting it out does not. It's been said now. That's the whole of what I owe you, ma'am, the saying of it." And from the dark of the stairwell, Gran Ivy's cracked voice came drifting down to nobody in particular, and what she said was, "The setting out is the sowing. The rest comes up in its own good season." I went to bed in a house that had people breathing in it for the first time in years. And somewhere in the small hours I half heard, or dreamed I heard, a soft patient working down in the shop below me. A scrape and a tap and the crumble of loosened brick, and once the ring of iron on stone. And I thought, let the man be. A proud man's dignity does its business at its own hours. And I slept. In the morning I was down before light, the way 68 years of ovens will fix a woman, and I stopped dead on the bottom stair with my hand on the rail. My father's brick oven, whose firebox had cracked and slumped 6 years back so it lost half its heat up the flue and baked crooked and could no longer hold enough loaves to matter, stood rebuilt. The whole failing arch had been torn down in the night and laid back up true. Every brick canted so clever it carried its own weight into the footing, the flue drawing clean. All of it alone in the dark by feel and one candle. Better than any mason in the county could raise in a week of daylight. Cass Selkirk sat on an upturned pail beside it, with his tools already wrapped, and watched me take it in. That was the working I'd heard, a mallet muffled in a rag so as not to wake the house that fed him. I put my hand flat on the warm new brick and had to work my jaw before it would say anything, and said, "That oven has baked cold and crooked 6 years. I've priced a mason to mend it and never had the money." And Cass stood up, laid one of his enormous careful hands flat on the arch, and spent a few of his hoarded words on me, which I'd learned he did not do for just anybody. And what he said, low and plain, was, "Good brick. It'll draw true now." And then he went to see about the wired wheel, and I stood in the gray light with my hand on an oven that would hold 3 times the bread it had the day before. And whatever had been sitting on my chest for 50 years shifted its weight and let me breathe under it. They meant to be gone in a day, but Bet's fever hung on and a 3-day ice storm sealed the roads to glass, and only a fool drives a sick baby onto glare ice to prove a point. Rhoda said, "Then we work our keep or we go," and she meant it to the bone. So they worked it, and those 2 weeks were the fullest that old shop had been since my own babies were alive in it. Cass mended the wired wheel and could not seem to stop, re-hanging my sagging door and pointing the loose brick and setting a new stone step. And every failing thing in that building quietly turned and started winning its fight. Will split me 2 winters of oven wood, and Rhoda took over my kitchen so complete that by the second morning I could not have found my own salt, and I did not care one particle, for I had forgotten what a shop sounds like with more than one pair of feet in it. And it was Gran Ivy, from my rocker by the stove, who told me the thing I have turned over every night since. "Used to be Sills all up and down these valleys," she said, "a baker in every town that set the day's leavings out in the dark so the proud could eat without kneeling. Road people called it an open sill. Wasn't charity and wasn't trade, just the old plain manners of a hungry country, where a full year and a lean year trade places quick, and the man laughing on the step today is the man at the sill come spring. Ain't but a few left now," she said, and looked at my bowed window and then at me and did not need to say the rest. But the thing Cass did before he left that mattered more than all the brick he laid, none of us knew yet. Being a millwright, he could not help but go look at the town's own grist mill down on the Sable, the Galt mill, the one wheel that ground the valley's flour. And he came back quiet one evening and got Rhoda to say it for him. For he'd not raise an alarm in another man's town in his own voice. "Cass says your town mill is dying," she told me. "The main shaft is checked halfway through with a crack he can lay his thumbnail in, and old Mr. Galt is too proud to see it, and some hard freeze when that wheel takes a full head of ice, the shaft is going to let go. And there is not a man in this county but Cass and his kin who can forge a new one. Lay in a store of flour before the deep of winter," he says, "more than you think you need." I told her the Galt mill had ground that grain 40 years, and Rhoda said, "Cass says nothing grinds forever. Things only grind until," and I knew, the way you know a true thing you'd rather not have heard, that the man was right. So I laid in a little extra and carried the warning to the town meeting. And Harlan Vance stood up in the back of the hall and said the day he took milling advice off a tramp who slept in Elva Trask's shed was the day the river ran uphill, and the town laughed with him, and I sat down and said no more. When the ice let go the roads, the Selkirks loaded to move on. For a family that mends mills must go where the broken mills are, and I did the one piece of business of that whole visit, loading their wagon before they could stop me with a side of meat and 2 sacks of flour and a crock of apple butter I'd hoarded 4 years and the 2 best quilts off the spare beds. And when Rhoda squared up to argue, I got there first. "It's freight," I said, "not charity. You're carrying word up the valley for me. Tell the road there's still an open sill on the bridge corner in Coldwater, same as there ever was, and there always will be." And Rhoda looked at me a long moment with those level eyes, and something in her face gave way about 1/4 of an inch, which on Rhoda Selkirk was a whole church sermon, and she said, "We'll tell the road, Mrs. Trask. You believe that we will." And Cass took my hand in his great one and said, "Lo, we'll come back through when you need us. Good brick lasts." And then they rolled up the river road in the thin, bright cold, the wagon small against the bare trees, and little Bet, mending now and cross with it, waved a fat hand off the tailboard till the road bent, and took them out of my sight. Word travels the roads faster than the mail ever learned to, and all that next summer my Sill kept feeding folks. But now they came knowing my name. And gifts took to appearing in my alley of a morning, ranked oven wood, a dressed hog, a little carved bird on my step, And buying flour that August, I heard Vance tell a loafer, loud enough for me, that the old woman on the bridge corner ran a poorhouse for tramps now, and he gave me the bottom half of his smile and said, "Mind your corner, Elva, for when this soft year turns hard, sentiment don't grind into flour, and we'll see then who feeds who." And then came the winter this whole story is named for, and I'll tell the heart of it straight and quick, for I lived it slow, and once through was a great plenty. The cold set in the first week of January, and did not quit for a month, storm on storm off the northern flats, and then came the ice, a great silver storm that glazed the whole valley an inch thick, shut every road to glass, and cut Coldwater off from the world entire. And on the worst night of it, the thing Cass had seen a year before came to pass exactly as he'd called it. The mill wheel took on a full head of ice, and the cracked shaft old Mr. Galt had been too proud to change groaned once under the load and let go, and the millstones stopped, and there was not another working mill within 30 frozen miles, and the spur line that might have brought in barreled flour lay under a foot of ice with no train to move on it. And I want you to understand what that meant, because it was the same thing it meant in my mother's house 50 years before. There was grain, plenty of it, cribs and bins all up the valley, a whole harvest of hard wheat. But a bin of wheat is not bread. Wheat you cannot grind is just so many stones you cannot eat, and with the one mill dead and the roads glass and the rail shut, the town sat down in the middle of its own full granary and began, slow and disbelieving, and then in real terror, to go hungry. Harlan Vance had flour, a store of barreled flour laid by in his elevator, and he did the thing such a man does when the hard year he's been predicting finally comes, which is that he did not share it and he did not give it. He priced it. He set it at $1, and then $2, and then $3 the sack, when a sack had been 60 cents in the fall. And the families with a little money paid it, weeping, and the families with none stood in the cold street and watched their children thin out, and it was my mother's house all over again, a whole town going hungry in the middle of plenty. Only this time it was not pride that starved them, it was one cold man's arithmetic. My own flour room, stocked a little extra on Cass's warning, held out longer than most, and I baked every hour I could stand and set not 2 but a dozen loaves on that sill, and then 2 dozen, and watched my barrels go down, and did the sum any baker can do in her sleep, and it came out that in about 9 more days I too would be scraping an empty barrel with a whole hungry town at my door. And I'll be honest with you now, for you've listened this long and earned it. On about the 6th night, I sat down on the bottom stair of my dark shop with a cold loaf in my lap and the last of the flour dust on my hands, and thought that this at last was the hard year Vance had promised me, the one that would close me for good. And I said out loud, to old Scene and to my brother Ansel 40 years under the frozen ground, what good is a Sill now? What good is a lifetime of bread in the dark, when the dark comes for the whole town at once, and I have not a fistful of flour left to answer it with? And that is exactly the night I heard them, away down the frozen valley, faint at first and steady, and coming on. Not the wind. Wheels, the crack and creak of iron tires biting through glaze ice, and the blow of straining teams, and men's voices low and even calling the horses on through the dark, and I hobbled to my window and scrubbed the frost off the glass with my fist, and I saw them come. Wagons. A whole slow line of wagons breaking up the iced river road in the black of the January night. Lantern after lantern swinging from the bows, and I counted them the way a girl counts the first stars, and I lost my count and started it twice, and the number I came to, both times, was more than 30. More than 30 wagons, grinding up a sealed valley in the dead of the worst freeze in memory, straight for my dark shop. And at the head of them, breaking trail with a lantern held high, was Cass Selkirk, and beside him Rhoda. And behind her Will grown near a man, and in the wagon bed wrapped in every quilt they owned, and riding like a queen was old Gran Ivy. And Bet, not so little now, standing against her grandmother's knees. And on every wagon behind them was grain, sacks and sacks of hard clean wheat, and lashed to the biggest wagon of all, canvas wrapped, was a thing I did not understand until Cass climbed down and took my 2 cold hands in his enormous ones and told me. It was a mill, a whole small grinding mill, stones and gear and shaft, that the Selkirks and 4 other road families had built with their own hands over that autumn and hauled 40 miles across the ice, because word had gone up and down the road in December that the mill had died at the Bridge Corner town, and the open Sill was about to go bare, and every road family that had ever taken a loaf off a dark windowsill in that whole country had turned their teams for Coldwater and started breaking trail, some from 2 valleys over, to pay a debt only they had been keeping the books on. "Told you it was written down, Mrs. Trask," said Rhoda, and her level face was wet and she let it be. And what happened over the next days I could tell you for a week, so I'll give it to you in one breath the way it came. By first light my alley was a workyard. Cass and his kin set their little haul mill up beside the dead Galt wheel, and they did not stop there. For a millwright cannot leave a broken wheel broken any more than I can leave a hungry child at a bare sill. And inside of 4 days they had forged and trued a new shaft and rehung the head gate and brought the great Galt mill itself groaning back to life, so that all that useless wheat began to pour down into flour again. And they hauled it by the barrow to my father's oven that Cass had rebuilt to hold 3 times the bread, and would not let me bake alone. Rhoda and Prue and a dozen road women I'd never laid eyes on rolled up their sleeves in my kitchen, and we baked around the clock in shifts, and the loaves came off in the hundreds. And no soul in Coldwater went to bed hungry from the 4th night of that freeze to the 1st day of the thaw. Not the ones with money, and not the ones without, and not a one was ever made to ask. Because the road people carried the bread out to every dark doorstep at night and set it on the sill, and never knocked, and never looked, which was the only way they knew how to give it. And up on the corner Harlan Vance had wanted for his grain block, those road families did one thing more. In the last 3 days of the freeze, they quarried stone from the old dead mill race and built me a bakehouse. A long stone bakehouse with a double oven twice the size of my old one, thick-walled and true, with a broad, cooling sill the whole length of the street front, high and open where the whole town could see it, built to stand 100 years of any winter the flats could throw down. And over the door, cut into the stone lintel in Cass Selkirk's own square, careful hand, they set my name, Elva Trask, and under it, smaller, 4 words. No one asks here. And on the last evening they lit the ovens, and the warm light and the smell of baking rolled out over the whole ice in town from that high open sill, and every soul that could walk had come up to the corner to see it. And when the first 100 loaves went out warm along that long stone shelf into the dark, not one of us said a word, and grown men took off their hats. Harlan Vance had come up the iced road on the 2nd day, on foot, having left his fine cutter foundered in the drifts. And on that last evening he came through the crowd to me with his hat in his 2 hands and said it plain, where the whole town could hear him. "I called these people beggars off my doorstep, Elva," he said, and I laughed doing it. And I stood in my elevator this winter and priced flour by the sack to people I've known my whole life while their children went thin. And I've watched these same beggars build a mill on the ice, and raise you a stone bakehouse on the corner I coveted, and feed the whole town off a windowsill. For the price of one supper, you gave them 2 winters back. I was wrong about them, and about her, and about what a loaf of bread in the dark is worth, and I've come up here on foot to say it where they can hear me, because I said the other thing where they could hear that. And then Gran Ivy, from her chair by the new oven, fixed him with those 2 chips of blue ice and said, "The Sill was open to you too this whole winter, Harlan Vance. It never once asked your name either." And the hard old man put his hand over his eyes in front of the whole town, and that was the end of the man he had been. I'll tell you the sum of it and let you go, for it's coming on dark. Vance opened his elevator the next morning and gave back every dollar he'd gouged to the penny, and paid the road families a fair wage to finish the Galt mill true, and the grain block he'd wanted on my corner he never built. And I'm told he takes his supper in the road camp now more nights than not, and says his thank you like a man who learned the word late. The Selkirks winter over in Coldwater now, in a snug stone house Cass raised 2 doors down, and Cass keeps every mill in the valley true. And Bet, not little anymore, calls me Gran Elva, and I quit correcting her long ago, and last fall Rhoda had a new baby, a girl. And without asking my leave they named her Ansel Ivy, and I did not get one whole sensible word said the entire day I heard of it. And the bakehouse stands on the bridge corner with my name and its 4 cut words over the door, and every night I climb to it and bake. And the last thing I do before I bank the fire is set the loaves out along that long open sill in the dark, and I do not look, and I do not count. The road up and down the valley has a name for that shelf now. They call it the Coldwater Sill, and when a year turns hard, every soul on it knows there is one corner of one town where the oven is always lit, and the sill is always full, and nobody is ever made to ask. So here is the whole of what an old baker knows, learned late and handed to you across a stove at dusk, whoever you are out there in the dark listening. The bread you keep is eaten by spring, but the bread you give away in the dark feeds you the rest of your life. You do not set a loaf on a sill to be repaid. You set it out because somewhere close by there is a proud family going hungry in a town full of plenty, too ashamed to knock. And you have an oven and a sack of flour, and no good reason on this earth to let a child grow thin, for the want of a loaf a hand can lift in the dark. But nothing set out in kindness on an open sill is ever truly lost. The road carries it, and the road forgets nothing it has carried. And some cracked shaft winter, when you are sitting alone on a dark stair with the last of the flour on your hands and no more good reason to hope, the same hungry road you fed will come grinding up the ice to your door, 30 wagons strong and a whole mill on the biggest one, with your name already cut in the stone. So let me leave you with the only question worth carrying home from this fire. When your own hard winter comes, and it will you be the man on the step who counts what he is owed and prices the hungry by the sack? Or will you be a windowsill in the dark that never once asks a soul its name? You have both of them in you tonight. I have met them both in myself. Only one of them will still have a warm house on the far side of February. It's dark now, and my knee tells me weather, and I have loaves to set out. But you come back and sit by this fire again, and if you have ever taken a loaf you could not pay for, or set one out for somebody who could not, you tell me about it, for I'll be here, and the oven will be lit. And away down the iced road in the gathering blue, a lantern is already climbing toward the corner where the sill is full, and it always will be.